You might have noticed that there's a new angry mob out there. They've gathered up all their best pitchforks and torches and gone to war against GPUs without, in their opinion, enough VRAM. It feels like just yesterday that we were all totally happy with 4 gigabyte GPUs. And then for like 2 days, 8 gigabytes was the minimum. And now the mob is demanding that GPUs with 8 or less gigabytes are worthless garbage. So, does the mob have a point? Or are they worried about nothing like usual? Well, I don't know. Let's find out together, shall we? Hello, hi there, I'm TechDweeb, welcome. Thanks for clicking on the video. Unless you've been living under a rock, in which case quit living there, that can't possibly be comfortable. You've probably heard a lot about VRAM these past few months. Each new GPU generation brings more and more VRAM to the table. Now even the base models of GPUs have at least 8 gigabytes, with the top-end GPUs like the 4090 or the RX 7900 XTX reaching a whopping 24 gigabytes. It feels like just yesterday that 4 gigabytes was the bare minimum, while 8 gigabytes was quote-unquote future-proof. And now, almost all of a sudden, 8 gigabytes doesn't cut it anymore, according to the sentiment online. I've been following the launch of the 40 series GPU reviews, and it feels like almost the entire discussion hinges on VRAM. Oh, the 4060 Ti only has 8 gigabytes of VRAM. The 16 gigabyte model is $100 more, but you need the VRAM, so that makes the 8 gigabyte version worthless. The 3060 had 12 gigabytes, but the 4060 will only have 8 gigabytes. How can new GPUs have only 8 gigabytes when everyone knows that 8 gigabytes isn't enough to enjoy games anymore? Blah, blah, blah. Like, where the heck did this idea come from? Oh, I'll tell you where it came from. It came from here, and this place. Yeah, a bunch of new games that came out in the last year or so have been so VRAM heavy that they've been having problems on GPUs with lower VRAM. And not just those 4 gigabyte and 6 gigabyte GPUs. 8 gigabyte GPUs too are having problems, apparently. The Last of Us is probably the most famous game that has been released recently for showing that 8 gigabytes isn't enough anymore. It's stuttered like crazy on 8 gigabyte GPUs, even at the low settings. So, that's it. 8 gigabytes is obsolete garbage, right? Or, hear me out, maybe, just maybe, there are a few modern games that were so poorly optimized that they either looked like garbage when VRAM limited or ran like crap. And it's not really about the VRAM, but more about a few high-profile game developers using bloated VRAM budgets of current-gen GPUs as an excuse to let their VRAM requirements go through the roof instead of taking the time to optimize their games. Just look at The Last of Us. At launch, yeah, if you had to run at medium or low settings on 8 gigabyte GPUs, and the game did not look so good at those settings, and it was stuttery as heck. But a few patches later, and now it looks good at those settings, and the stutters are gone. All it took was a little more work by the developers, a little more optimization. So was that a VRAM problem or a game design problem? I think you get what I'm getting at. I think the whole 8 gigabytes isn't enough mentality is way overblown. It's the same sort of thing that happens at every major hardware revision. You know, the new thing comes along, a few use cases come along that take advantage of the new capacity, and then suddenly everyone says you need the new thing. So this is what we're going to find out for ourselves today. Is 8 gigabytes of VRAM a terrible experience? Do you need more than 8 gigabytes to play modern games? I have 2 GPUs to test out here, both from the last generation. I have a 12 gigabyte RTX 3060 and an 8 gigabyte RTX 3060 Ti. The 3060 Ti is a slightly more powerful GPU than the 3060, but the 3060 has an additional 4 gigabytes of VRAM. So if the rhetoric is correct, if VRAM is that important and 8 gigabyte really isn't enough to play modern games, then surely the 12 gigabyte RTX 3060 will give us a better gaming experience than the 3060 Ti with its measly 8 gigabytes of VRAM, right? Well, there's only one way to find out. I'm testing out 5 games that are known to have VRAM issues. I have the new Lord of the Rings Gollum, Hogwarts Legacy, Uncharted, Plague Tale Requiem, and The Last of Us. Let's start out with Lord of the Rings Gollum. This is the perfect example of what I was talking about earlier, about how poor VRAM allocation and bloated texture budgets are the symptom of a poorly optimized game. This game is terribly optimized. It's a glitchy, stuttery mess. However, I'll mention that for all my test runs, I did a little run through of the area before I did the benchmark run, so I gave the game a chance to load textures or compile shaders or whatever, just in an attempt to remove any of the poorly optimized texture streaming stuff to affect us as minimally as possible. We're aiming for pure GPU performance. So here on the RTX 3060 12GB, Gollum is running totally fine. In motion, we see an average of 89 FPS with 62 FPS 1% lows. And this is at the medium preset, by the way. So it's running good. But is it just because of the 12GB of VRAM? Well, here on the 3060 Ti, with its measly 8GB, it's not doing worse, it's doing better. 104 FPS on average with 83 FPS 1% lows. It's running so good we could easily go up to the high settings if you were targeting like 60 FPS. Which is about what I expected. The 8GB of VRAM isn't making the game an unplayable mess. It's not making the 3060 Ti worse than the 3060. As you can see, the VRAM allocation is within our 8GB budget, so we're fine. You can play this game. This ugly, stupid, terrible game if you want to, if you have an 8GB GPU. Here's a side-by-side static scene so that we can get a nice, accurate comparison. The 12GB 3060 runs the game fine, but the 8GB 3060 Ti runs it better. At least in this area of the game. I mean, maybe there are more intense areas later that cause an issue, but since we're at the high settings, we can lower down to medium settings if needed. And like I showed in this video, there's usually not much of a sacrifice when we go down to medium settings, so don't feel like you're missing out on a lot if you do. Here in Hogwarts Legacy on the 12GB RTX 3060 at high settings, we get 59 FPS on average with 46 FPS 1% lows. Not too shabby. But oh, look at that FPS overlay. We're using 8.6GB of VRAM. So there you go. That's proof that the 8GB isn't enough for this game at these settings, right? Surely our RTX 3060 Ti is gonna tank, right? No, it's doing great. 71 FPS on average with 54 FPS 1% lows. It's better in every way. But what's curious is look at that VRAM figure. We're down to only 7.3GB of VRAM. And here's why. An important factor is that when we look at the VRAM numbers on the screen here, we're seeing VRAM allocation, which is how much VRAM the game actually reserves for textures and frame buffer, not necessarily how much it's actually using. And it's a balancing act between allocation and usage, between display resolution and texture resolution. And this balance does need to be met or you will get into issues. But I could and probably will make an entire video on that topic. Maybe be a deep dive into where we can actually draw the line of when 8GB actually isn't enough. Today, I'm just here to show you that 8GB is enough to enjoy these games at settings like this, and they look great and play great. And at the very least, even if it's not optimal, it's not like 8GB is obsolete, as lots of the discussion online would have you believe. I should mention that I know these aren't the most VRAM hungry parts of these games. I'm just working with the locations that I have unlocked so far, but considering the performance here, I highly doubt that we'll run into issues later on considering how much headroom that we have here. In Uncharted, I set the graphics at high quality, but I probably should have gone up to ultra because we're doing totally fine here. But honestly, at these settings, the game looks so freaking good, I doubt you'd even notice a difference. On the 12GB 3060, I got 136 FPS on average with 107 FPS 1% lows. Yeah, even at the lowest, we're still getting over 100 FPS. And on the 3060 Ti, our average FPS goes up to 164 FPS. Holy crap, this is an ultra high refresh rate experience on a game that's known to be a VRAM hog. And even our 1% lows are at 137 FPS. So it's a buttery smooth even during the lowest FPS dips. I have literally seen people online say you can't play this game on an 8GB GPU. I've seen people say all sorts of dumb things on the internet, to be fair, but at least I can show you why this one is so dumb. It's playing great here on this 8GB GPU somehow. Again, look at that VRAM allocation. 6.8GB on the 3060, but only 5.7GB on the 3060 Ti. Yet the games look identical. And the 3060 Ti is getting way better performance even though the VRAM allocation is way less. And this is just the way VRAM allocation works. The games reserve that much VRAM for the textures and the frame buffer, but it doesn't use the entire thing. It's just there in case it needs it. And obviously it doesn't need it because it's running great on both GPUs. Here's a Plague Tale Requiem. I bought this game specifically for this video, so you're welcome for that. I will play and enjoy the game. It's a freaking beautiful game, so I'm happy to have it. But this is another one of those games that keeps coming up in the VRAM discussion, so I was modest. I'm running at the medium preset. Although you never know it because the game looks so freaking beautiful even at the medium preset. Seriously, look at those textures and this lighting and the shadows. It's freaking nuts, man. This is medium settings. Here on the 12GB RTX 3060, we're getting 68 FPS on average with 59 FPS 1% lows. So it's a perfectly smooth experience. And on the 8GB RTX 3060 Ti, yeah, it's running great here, as expected. 84 FPS on average with 71 FPS 1% lows. So the performance is much better, even though we're running with 4GB less VRAM on the 3060 Ti. I should mention that this entire video is only about the performance that we get comparing 8GB versus 12GB in a like-for-like comparison at settings appropriate for this GPU price range. So in lots of games, ultra settings are going to be pushing the graphics beyond what a modest GPU can handle. That's where you'll be getting into super bloated texture budget territory. Those settings are made for high-end GPUs with 16GB or 24GB of VRAM, so obviously they're not going to run well on 8GB GPUs. But the inclusion of those settings doesn't mean that you can't get an 8GB GPU and enjoy all the modern games. Don't let the existence of ultra settings give you FOMO. If the game looks like this, why would you feel like you aren't able to enjoy it? And last but not least, The Last of Us. Do you like what I did there? Last, but okay. This is it. This is the one. The game that's causing all the fuss. Apparently, it runs like garbage on 8GB GPUs. If you have an 8GB GPU and you want to play this game, you need an upgrade. Even at 1080p, even at low settings, right? Well, we're running with the high settings, but as you can see, we could easily have got up to ultra on the RTX 3060 12GB if we're targeting 60 FPS, because we got 76 FPS on average, and it was super smooth. 68 FPS 1% lows. No stuttering, no weird texture stuff. Just a totally normal, enjoyable gaming experience. And on the 8GB RTX 3060 Ti, it's running beautifully as well. 91 FPS on average with 76 FPS 1% lows. And you might look at this and think, well, it's running amazing, so what's all the fuss about? Obviously, 8GB of VRAM is enough to enjoy and play the game even at high settings. This is the game that was famous for being total garbage on 8GB GPUs. Do not buy an 8GB GPU because look how bad Last of Us plays, they said. But here we are. It's totally playable and enjoyable. But this wasn't always the case. When this game launched, it had a ton of issues. There's stuttering, ugly textures, and it seemed like VRAM was the culprit because it ran way better on cards with more than 8GB. But then the devs put in a bit more work, put out a few patches, and now it runs beautifully. It runs exactly how a properly optimized game should run. Check out this video by Digital Foundry if you want to see the comparisons before and after the patches. This is the difference that optimization makes. And this is the real reason that there's a problem with 8GB GPUs now. I don't like that the problem is put on us, the customers. The two most popular GPUs in the world are 4GB and 6GB. It's up to developers to make sure that their games run well on a variety of hardware, not just the super high-end stuff. It's a nail in the coffin for the success of a game if it only caters to the ultra high-end performance crowd, which is why there's been so much outrage about VRAM. And that's why Naughty Dog went back and fixed the problem. Lots of reviews of the 4060 Ti showed how bad it did in comparison to GPUs with more capacity, even incredulously pointing out that last gen's 3060 had 12GB. I can't remember who said it, but it was one of the major reviews, and they literally said that 8GB GPUs are dead in the water. And then they show how bad they do at 1440p ultra settings. But I don't think that any of the 8GB GPUs are priced so that you should expect to run games at 1440p ultra settings. For now, 8GB GPUs are 1080p cards, which is right where they should be because they're cheap cards. I mean, cheap is a relative term, by the way. Everything is more expensive these days. Heck, the 4060 Ti is being dragged through the mud for costing $399, the same as the 3060 Ti when it launched, and it doesn't have much better performance. But if you adjust for inflation, which is something that reviewers rarely do for some reason, it's actually significantly cheaper than the 3060 Ti. That's another topic entirely, though. I'll make a video about that someday, I think. I'm not saying that VRAM doesn't matter. I'm fighting against the hyperbole that 8 gigabytes isn't enough to play these games. I'm not saying that the games don't benefit from more VRAM if you want to run at higher settings or resolutions. That's just the way it goes with progress. At one point, 2 gigabyte GPUs were made obsolete when games started optimizing for 4 gigabyte GPUs. And now 4 gigabyte GPUs are being pushed aside. But this is only in a handful of games, and I'm planning on revisiting a few of these quote-unquote unplayable games with my 4 gigabyte GTX 1650 because from my experience, most of these games are actually totally playable and enjoyable even on a 4 gigabyte GTX 1650 as well. As long as you choose the appropriate settings, and as I've said many times already, games look good at medium settings or even low settings, and you can enjoy games like that. And it makes me frustrated when I hear people say things like 4 gigabytes or even 8 gigabytes isn't even enough to play Last of Us or whatever, because that's just not true. So, sorry for ranting. I guess this video ended up pretty ranty, which wasn't my intention. I hope you found this video useful. Please let me know your thoughts on this stuff in the comments below. I'm super curious to see what you think of my hot take here. Give me a thumbs up if you liked the video, or don't if you didn't. Subscribe and stuff. I'm TechDweeb. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.